Have you ever stared at a can of tuna and felt completely sure you knew what was inside? The metal shines, the label looks trustworthy. The words speak to you like a promise of purity. You might see phrases such as wild caught, rich in protein, or sustainably sourced. You assume that means safety. You assume it means quality. But what if that simple "can you reach for" in the supermarket is not what it seems? What if behind that label lies a web of shortcuts, half-truths, and quiet recalls that never make the headlines? Today we begin a 4-part investigation that will uncover how the canned tuna industry built its empire on trust, and how that trust has started to crack. For decades, canned tuna was the quiet hero of the American pantry. It was cheap, easy to store, and full of protein. It became part of lunchboxes, quick dinners, and emergency kits. The brands that sold it became household names. Families bought them without question because they were consistent. A can of tuna looked the same in every store, in every state. The design never changed much, and that familiarity created something powerful. Faith. People trusted what they recognized. But recognition is not the same as safety. Over time, the industry behind that familiar label turned into one of the most complex and least transparent food networks in the world. To understand how this happened, you have to look at the scale. Tuna is not produced by one company or even one country. It is caught across multiple oceans, processed in different nations, canned in others, and finally shipped to American shelves. Each step in that chain is a chance for something to go wrong. A delay in freezing, a cheaper supplier slipping into the rotation, a machine that runs too fast and fails to seal a lid completely. Most of these problems stay hidden because they are statistically rare and because the companies involved are masters at risk control. If one batch fails, they recall quietly, replace it with another, and issue a short statement that most consumers never see. Our investigation begins with 5 major brands that represent different faces of the same problem. We will call them Brand A, Brand B, Brand C, Brand D, and Brand E. Each has its own story, its own way of maintaining the image of trust while wrestling with the reality of cost, competition, and control. But before we break them down, you need to see how the system itself creates the perfect environment for compromise. When tuna leaves the ocean, it is supposed to be frozen within hours. That moment locks in quality and prevents bacteria growth. But the ocean fleets that catch these fish often operate far from shore for weeks. To save space, they load fish by the ton and use ice rather than full freezing. That delay allows temperature to fluctuate, and bacteria begin to grow long before the fish reach a plant. Once they arrive, plants are under immense pressure to process fast. The faster they work, the more cans they can ship, and the higher the profit margin. But fast means less inspection. It means relying on random checks instead of full evaluation. It means trusting machines and data sheets more than eyes and senses. In 2025, regulators noticed an increase in recalls across multiple seafood brands. Most of them involved issues with packaging integrity. A small defect in the seal of a can might not be visible, but it can let in air and create the perfect environment for bacteria like Clostridium botulinum to grow. That single organism can turn a can of tuna into a potential hazard without changing the smell or color. The alarming part was not the number of recalls, but how quietly they were handled. Notices were often buried in corporate websites or limited to specific states. Many people who had affected cans never heard about them at all. The companies involved insisted the recalls were voluntary and precautionary. But the pattern suggested a deeper problem. These failures were not isolated. They were symptoms of an industry running at maximum speed with minimal oversight. Brand A, for example, has been around for generations. Its advertisements show smiling families and a voiceover that says quality you can trust. Yet behind that slogan lies a patchwork of suppliers across 3 continents. Internal documents from one inspection showed that fish quality varied widely depending on the source. Some suppliers delivered smaller, fresher tuna with low mercury levels. Others provided larger, older fish with higher contamination risk. Rather than separate them, the company blended all sources into one production line. The result looked uniform but hid unpredictable variations in safety. That practice is perfectly legal, yet it leaves consumers in the dark. Then there is the matter of temperature control. Every part of tuna production relies on refrigeration. If a single link in that chain fails, histamine can form inside the flesh. This chemical is invisible, odorless and resistant to normal cooking. Once it develops, it can cause allergic reactions ranging from skin irritation to severe nausea. In internal shipping logs reviewed by auditors, Brand A recorded several instances of refrigeration delays exceeding recommended limits. Instead of discarding the affected cargo, they mixed it with newer batches to dilute the risk. Statistically, this made the average histamine level acceptable, but individual cans could still pose a danger. It was a math solution to a biological problem, one that looks neat on a spreadsheet but not inside your body. Brand B positions itself as the modern alternative. Its packaging is sleek, minimal, designed to attract younger consumers who care about sustainability. The company promises pole and line caught tuna only, a method known to minimize harm to marine life. However, investigations into its suppliers reveal a different reality. Only a small portion of its tuna actually comes from pole and line operations. The majority is caught using purse-seine nets, fitted with floating devices that lure entire schools of fish along with sharks, turtles, and other species. The company defends this by saying it follows the spirit of sustainable fishing, not necessarily the letter. It is a phrase that sounds noble but means little when scrutinized. Even more concerning are the labor conditions tied to Brand B's suppliers. Several plants in its network have faced past allegations of underpayment, forced overtime, and unsafe working environments. Workers described standing for hours in humid conditions with limited protective gear. The brand insists it enforces strict ethical sourcing standards. But audits are typically announced weeks in advance, giving factories time to clean, repaint, and temporarily improve conditions before inspectors arrive. The result is an illusion of compliance, a show staged for paperwork. Brand C sits at the other end of the spectrum. It is the budget champion, the label you find stacked in bulk at discount stores and food pantries. Its appeal lies in affordability, but cheapness is not magic. It is the sum of many reductions. Cheaper raw fish, fewer inspections, faster machines, thinner cans. Inside one of Brand C's facilities, a sterilization machine malfunctioned for several hours without anyone noticing. By the time technicians fixed it, thousands of cans had passed through. Instead of discarding them, managers conducted a handful of tests. A few samples passed, so the shipment continued. Weeks later, complaints surfaced about off smells and strange textures. No recall followed. The issue disappeared quietly under routine customer service statements. This cycle repeats across the industry. When a defect surfaces, it is treated as an isolated event. When contamination is detected, the company releases a short notice, blames a supplier, and moves on. The media rarely covers these small recalls because they are not dramatic enough for headlines. Meanwhile, the same patterns continue. Pressure for volume, incentives for speed, and the constant balance between cost and caution. The people making those decisions are not villains. They are executives responding to market demands. But their choices shape what ends up on your table. It is easy to believe that government agencies catch every mistake. In truth, oversight is limited. Inspectors cannot monitor every shipment, every factory, every can. They rely heavily on company data, self-reporting, and random checks. Many plants operate overseas, outside direct U.S. jurisdiction. By the time a problem is discovered, thousands of cans may already sit in warehouses or homes. This global complexity gives corporations plausible deniability. When something goes wrong, they can claim it happened beyond their immediate control. As consumers, we are left with faith. We trust that the can we open is safe because it always has been. We rely on familiarity as a substitute for transparency. But the truth is that every can of tuna carries an unseen story, and some of those stories are not as clean as the water on the label. In the next part of this investigation, we will expose the hidden strategies companies use to manage their image when problems arise. You will see how recalls are shaped, how rebranding hides manufacturing flaws, and how marketing transforms mistakes into success stories. We will also begin to look at two smaller companies that are quietly rewriting the rules by prioritizing quality and traceability over volume. Their methods show that change is possible, even in an industry this large. Before we move forward, take a moment to look at the tuna in your kitchen cabinet. It might seem harmless, but it represents a network of choices made by people you will never meet. Those choices decide whether your food is safe, whether workers are protected, and whether the ocean itself is respected. The story of canned tuna is not just about fish, it is about trust, and as we are about to see, that trust has been tested more than most people realize. When we left off, we had begun to see the cracks in the canned tuna industry's image of perfection. We talked about Brand A's blending practices, Brand B's selective sustainability, and Brand C's silent shortcuts. But those were only part of a bigger picture. Behind the polished commercials and smiling spokespeople, there are more layers of control, spin, and public manipulation than most people could imagine. And the next two brands in our story, Brand D and Brand E, reveal just how deep that game goes. Brand D built its reputation on legacy. It is one of the oldest names in canned seafood, with a history stretching back to the early 20th century. Its commercials show old fishing boats, rugged captains, and the tagline that says, "Crafted with tradition." For many older Americans, Brand D feels like nostalgia in a can. They grew up with it, trusted it, and passed that habit on to their children. But behind that sentimental image lies a company that has mastered the art of controlling perception. A few years ago, Brand D faced an internal crisis. One of its key suppliers in Southeast Asia was caught mixing tuna with lower-cost fish species. The goal was to stretch the yield of each catch and reduce cost per can. In theory, this practice violates labeling laws. But in practice, detection is difficult. Most consumers cannot tell the difference once the meat is shredded and soaked in oil or water. DNA testing could expose the fraud, but testing every batch would cost millions. So the company quietly ended its contract with the supplier and issued a vague statement about ensuring product integrity. It avoided the word recall, and most customers never noticed. Behind the scenes, however, executives knew this was not an isolated event. They recognized that the entire supply chain depended on a network of independent brokers who moved fish from port to plant. Some of these brokers used paperwork that did not always match reality. Catch certificates could be forged, weights inflated, origins blurred. Rather than risk public scandal, Brand D chose containment over confrontation. They strengthened their internal traceability system but kept it confidential, claiming it was proprietary technology. The result, a new layer of secrecy disguised as innovation. When journalists began asking questions about transparency, Brand D invited them to tour one of its plants. The visit was carefully staged. Workers were briefed in advance, equipment was spotless, and the sample cans displayed on camera were from a premium line rather than the regular one. The resulting media coverage was glowing. Headlines praised the company's commitment to tradition and quality. It was a textbook example of narrative management. Control the image, and you control the truth. Brand E took a different route. It branded itself as the ethical disruptor. Its commercials are modern, featuring clean topography, bright kitchens, and young families cooking healthy meals. Its slogan focuses on health and sustainability. The company's website proudly lists ocean safe, low mercury, and traceable on every label. But when independent food scientists tested a batch of its products, they found mercury levels slightly above the threshold recommended for pregnant women. It was not illegal, but it contradicted the brand's promise of exceptional safety. Instead of addressing the issue directly, Brand E's marketing team launched a campaign emphasizing the natural variability of ocean species. They said mercury levels fluctuate depending on season and region, which is true, but they omitted one crucial detail. Those fluctuations can be reduced with better sourcing. Rather than change suppliers, Brand E doubled down on the narrative that slight variations are natural and therefore acceptable. It turned a weakness into a talking point. The more we dug into these two brands, the more we saw a shared pattern. Both had perfected the balance between transparency and obscurity. They knew exactly how much information to reveal to appear honest without exposing their vulnerabilities, and both relied heavily on the public's short memory. A few weeks of good marketing could bury months of bad headlines. But the industry was beginning to change. Consumers were growing skeptical. Social media made it easier for independent testers, environmental groups, and even regular people to share findings. A single viral post showing a contaminated can could spark nationwide discussions. In response, a new generation of smaller companies began to emerge, built around a promise of authenticity. These newcomers lacked the resources of the big brands, but they had something far more valuable: credibility. One of them, which we'll call Ocean Pure, started as a direct-to-consumer brand in California. Instead of selling through grocery chains, it shipped cans directly to subscribers who wanted traceable seafood. Each can came with a QR code that allowed buyers to track the fish from ocean to factory. The code linked to images of the vessel, the catch date, and even the name of the captain. This level of transparency felt radical in a market dominated by vague claims. Customers responded enthusiastically. They felt part of something honest. Ocean Pure's founder, a former marine biologist, said the idea came from frustration. After years studying fisheries, he realized that the biggest obstacle to sustainability was opacity. When consumers cannot see the journey of their food, they cannot make informed choices. So he designed a system that exposed everything. But that decision came at a cost. Full traceability meant slower production, higher expenses, and smaller profits. For a while, Ocean Pure struggled to compete on price. Then, during a wave of tuna recalls in 2025, their sales spiked. People were desperate for a brand they could trust, and Ocean Pure became that name. Another rising brand, Bluecurrent, took a slightly different path. Instead of focusing on traceability, it built its reputation on micro-batch processing. Each batch was small enough to be monitored by hand at every stage. Workers recorded temperature, sealing pressure, and sterilization time in real time using a digital system connected to quality assurance staff. If anything went wrong, production paused immediately. There were no massive recalls because no massive batches existed. Each lot was self-contained. At first, large retailers ignored Bluecurrent, assuming its scale was too small to matter. But the company used that to its advantage. It built a community of loyal buyers online who valued craftsmanship over mass production. Influencers began promoting it as the craft tuna of the modern era, and demand exploded. Soon, big brands were trying to imitate the language of small batch quality without changing their industrial processes. It was proof that integrity could compete with volume if presented the right way. Still, the rise of Ocean Pure and Bluecurrent did not mean the end of the old guard. The big brands had money, lawyers, and influence. They began lobbying for new labeling regulations that, while appearing consumer-friendly, actually made it harder for small companies to differentiate themselves. One proposed rule required all traceability information to follow a standardized format that diluted the impact of detailed QR systems. Another allowed large producers to use the term responsibly sourced even when the supply chain included controversial practices, as long as they contributed to environmental programs. It was a strategic move to reclaim moral ground through legislation. As these policy battles unfolded, a quiet war began behind the scenes. Marketing teams from major corporations started monitoring social media conversations about canned tuna. They identified key influencers, offered sponsorships, and promoted feel-good content about ocean conservation. The goal was to flood the digital space with positivity and drown out skepticism. The narrative shifted once again. By the end of 2025, casual consumers scrolling through their feeds would see posts about healthy recipes, sustainability pledges, and family meals, not about recalls or factory issues. The machine had adapted. Yet not everyone was convinced. Independent investigators, consumer rights groups, and environmental activists continued to dig deeper. They found recurring patterns of obfuscation and partial truth. One report analyzed 30 different canned tuna products and discovered that nearly half contained fish species not listed on their labels. Some samples even tested positive for elevated histamine levels, despite passing official checks. The report did not name the brands directly, but insiders knew which ones matched the data. Once again, the industry's biggest problem was not what it did wrong, but how often it refused to admit it. Meanwhile, the small players faced their own struggles. Ocean Pure's detailed transparency exposed them to constant scrutiny. A single delay in shipment or inconsistency in tracking drew criticism, even if minor. Bluecurrent's limited output made it hard to meet growing demand, which led to accusations of elitism. Consumers wanted ethical options, but only if they were convenient and affordable. This tension revealed the deeper truth about modern food systems. Transparency is expensive, and most people are not ready to pay for it. Behind all of this lies a question that touches everyone who has ever opened a can of tuna. How much do we really want to know about our food? The big brands have learned that too much honesty can be dangerous. The small brands have learned that it can be exhausting, and the regulators seem trapped in between, trying to protect public safety while avoiding economic disruption. It is a delicate balance that rarely favors full disclosure. In the next part of this investigation, we will follow the money. We will trace how funding, lobbying, and public relations shape what you read on a label. We will explore the secret connections between corporate executives, trade organizations, and lawmakers that decide which information is shared and which is buried. We will also look at the quiet emergence of laboratory-grown alternatives that claim to solve the tuna problem entirely. What you will see next is not just a story about food safety. It is a story about power, persuasion, and the invisible networks that keep the truth just out of reach. Because in the world of canned tuna, what you are allowed to know is often less important than what you are not. When people think of canned tuna, they imagine fishing boats, oceans, and factories. They rarely think of boardrooms, lobbyists, and political donations, yet this is where the real power of the tuna industry lives. It is not only about fish, it is about influence, money, and control over what the public is allowed to know. The story of how canned tuna is sold to millions of Americans is as much about Washington, D.C. as it is about the Pacific Ocean. To understand how this web of influence operates, we have to look at the Tuna Trade Council, a powerful organization that represents the collective interests of major seafood companies. Brands like A, B, C, D, and E all contribute millions of dollars each year to fund the Council's lobbying and public relations efforts. Officially, the Council's mission is to promote sustainable fishing and consumer confidence. Unofficially, it acts as a shield, deflecting scrutiny and softening regulation. When something goes wrong in the industry, the Council is the voice that steps forward, offering calm statements and reassuring words like isolated incident and industry best practices. Behind those words lies a highly coordinated machine. The Council maintains teams of lawyers, data analysts, and communication strategists who monitor potential threats. If a study emerges suggesting rising mercury levels, they prepare a counter-report highlighting improvements in quality control. If activists publish videos of poor working conditions in processing plants, they release footage of smiling workers in new uniforms, accompanied by cheerful music and corporate statements about human rights. It is not illegal. It is strategic storytelling, and it works. Every year, the tuna industry spends millions lobbying federal agencies such as the Food and Drug Administration and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The official goal is to ensure fair and consistent regulation. In practice, that often means delaying or weakening new rules that might raise costs. For example, when a proposal surfaced requiring companies to disclose the exact fishing region and method on each can, the Council argued that it would create confusion for consumers. They claimed that most people do not understand the difference between long line, pole, and line, or purse seine fishing. The regulation was shelved after intense lobbying. The industry also invests heavily in scientific influence. Several research institutes that publish reports on seafood safety receive funding from foundations quietly linked to major brands. These donations are legal and often public, but the strings attached are invisible. Scientists are rarely told what to conclude, but they are gently steered toward questions that align with corporate interests. Instead of asking whether the entire supply chain is sustainable, they are encouraged to measure narrow variables like bycatch reduction in a specific zone. The result is technically accurate but strategically limited data that supports the industry's image. Brand A, which we discussed earlier, has one of the largest lobbying budgets in the sector. It employs former government officials who understand the inner workings of regulation. One of them previously worked at the agency that oversees food labeling. That connection matters. It helps the company anticipate rule changes and shape the language used in public policy. When you see words like responsibly sourced or environmentally conscious on a label, they often originate from committee discussions where industry representatives had a seat at the table. Meanwhile, Brand D and Brand E take a more modern approach. Instead of relying solely on traditional lobbying, they focus on digital influence. They sponsor nutrition conferences, fitness apps, and food blogs. They fund social media campaigns promoting tuna as a superfood full of omega-3 and lean protein. These campaigns blur the line between marketing and education. A post written by a nutrition influencer may look independent, but behind it is a marketing team ensuring the message aligns with corporate goals. The problem with this ecosystem is not only that it shapes perception, but that it also suppresses transparency. Journalists who try to investigate food safety issues often face subtle resistance. Access to facilities is restricted. Requests for data are delayed or denied. Whistleblowers inside factories risk losing their jobs or facing lawsuits for breaching confidentiality agreements. One former quality control inspector who spoke anonymously described the culture as safety through silence. Problems are fixed quietly because publicity hurts profit. To be fair, the government does regulate seafood imports and processing, but those regulations depend heavily on company cooperation. Inspectors cannot be everywhere. They rely on paperwork, self-reporting, and occasional audits. When violations are found, they are often resolved through warnings rather than fines. A recall is expensive, embarrassing, and damaging to brand image, so every incentive points toward keeping problems internal. The public sees only a fraction of what happens behind closed doors. This combination of money, influence, and selective transparency creates a kind of controlled reality. On the surface, everything looks accountable. There are committees, audits, and sustainability programs. But look closer, and you find a network designed to manage appearances rather than expose truth. Each layer absorbs blame before it reaches the top. If a supplier is caught using illegal labor, the brand blames the supplier. If contamination occurs, the factory blames equipment failure. If regulations tighten, the lobbyists argue they are already complying voluntarily. Responsibility dissolves into the system. One of the clearest examples of this control came during a congressional hearing in early 2025. Lawmakers questioned seafood executives about recurring safety recalls. The executives maintained calm composure. They spoke about improvements in tracking, investment in sustainability, and consumer safety. Not once did they admit to systemic failures. Behind them sat industry lawyers who had rehearsed every possible question. The hearing ended with polite applause, and the public was reassured once again that everything was fine. But not everyone in the room believed it. Some smaller companies, including Ocean Pure and Blue Current, sent representatives to observe the proceedings. They saw firsthand how deeply entrenched the old system was. Afterward, they issued an open letter calling for independent oversight and a public database of all seafood recalls. The letter went viral online but received little coverage on television. Large media outlets depend on advertising revenue from the same corporations being criticized. Conflict of interest silences the story before it spreads. The deeper question, though, is why this pattern persists. The answer lies in the economics of convenience. Tuna is one of the cheapest sources of animal protein available in the United States. Millions of people rely on it every week. Any disruption to that supply would create public backlash. Policymakers know this, and so do corporations. As long as prices stay low and shelves stay stocked, the majority of consumers will not question how the product got there. Comfort is the industry's greatest ally. Behind the scenes, research is already shaping the next phase of control. Companies are investing in what they call digital trust platforms. These systems use blockchain-like databases to record product information, but only part of it is accessible to the public. The rest remains proprietary. It gives the illusion of transparency while maintaining corporate control over what data is visible. It is a technological solution to a moral problem. At the same time, a quiet revolution is brewing in laboratories. Several startups are developing cell-based tuna, grown from fish cells without catching a single animal. The concept promises a future where contamination, overfishing, and labor issues disappear. But this innovation threatens the established giants. Internal documents from one industry roundtable show that major brands are monitoring these startups closely, preparing strategies to either acquire them or regulate them out of competition. They know that whoever controls the narrative will control the future of seafood. Bluecurrant's founder once said that the real battle is not between companies, but between truth and convenience. Consumers claim they want honesty, but they also want low prices and easy choices. The industry understands this contradiction and exploits it perfectly. By offering just enough information to appear transparent, it keeps trust alive without surrendering control. As 2025 draws to a close, public attention drifts again. A few recalls here and there make minor headlines, but nothing sticks for long. The system resets, new marketing campaigns roll out, ocean scenes, happy families, and soft music play on screens while the deeper issues remain unresolved. Yet under the surface, pressure is building. Younger consumers are asking harder questions. Environmental groups are pushing for mandatory labeling of fishing methods and labor conditions. Independent scientists are demanding open data access, and slowly the cracks in the narrative are widening. In the next and final part of this investigation, we will explore what happens when the truth can no longer be contained. We will look at the breaking point of consumer trust, the possible collapse of the old system, and what the future of canned tuna might look like if transparency finally wins. We will also reflect on what all of this means for us as consumers, and how small actions, like choosing where to spend our money, can shift the balance of power. Stay tuned, because the ending of this story will not be what most people expect. By the time 2026 approached, the cracks in the canned tuna empire had become too wide to ignore. What started as scattered recalls and quiet audits had evolved into a wave of public distrust. For decades, the industry thrived on invisibility. People never questioned what happened between ocean and shelf. But the illusion was beginning to break, and for the first time, the truth was leaking out faster than the companies could contain it. It started with an accident. A whistleblower from one of Brand C's subcontracted factories uploaded photos of corroded canning machines to a private online forum. The images showed worn metal parts coated with residue, a clear sign of poor maintenance. Within hours, the pictures were shared thousands of times. The factory's location was identified, and local journalists confirmed that the equipment had not been replaced for nearly 6 years. Brand C initially denied any connection to the facility, but records revealed that it had been part of their supply chain for more than a decade. The story exploded across social media, becoming one of the most viewed food safety scandals of the year. Other stories soon followed. Workers from a Brand B partner plant in Southeast Asia came forward with evidence of unpaid wages and forced overtime. Their testimonies described 12-hour shifts, minimal breaks, and constant pressure to meet production targets. One worker recorded a supervisor telling them, "If you slow down, we all lose our jobs." The video went viral. Brand B issued a statement expressing concern and pledging an investigation, but the damage was done. Consumers were seeing the human cost behind their cheap cans. Then came the biggest blow. A recall that could not be hidden. Brand D, one of the industry's oldest names, was forced to recall over 2 million cans due to contamination concerns after several customers reported serious illness. For the first time, national television networks covered the story extensively. Reporters visited grocery stores, interviewed consumers, and questioned the Food and Drug Administration about oversight failures. The agency promised action, but behind closed doors, officials admitted they lacked the resources to police an industry this vast. The public reaction was fierce. Online forums filled with discussions about which brands to trust. Supermarket shelves that once displayed neat stacks of tuna were suddenly half empty. Some chains temporarily suspended sales until they could verify safety records. In the chaos, smaller companies like Ocean Pure and Bluecurrant saw their sales skyrocket. People were willing to pay more for what they believed was real transparency. Ocean Pure responded quickly to the crisis. Its founder released a video tour of the company's production facility, showing every step of the process from fish arrival to final sealing. No actors, no music, just real footage. The video spread rapidly, praised for its honesty. Bluecurrant followed with a series of posts showing its microbatch system in action, complete with timestamps and temperature logs. Both brands gained tens of thousands of new customers almost overnight. The big brands, meanwhile, were scrambling. They launched emergency campaigns emphasizing commitment to quality, but years of overused slogans no longer worked. People had seen too much. They wanted facts, not promises. Executives convened emergency meetings with the Tuna Trade Council to develop a unified response. Internal memos later leaked, revealing their strategy: restore confidence through controlled transparency. The plan involved releasing limited factory footage, commissioning a few independent audits, and showcasing improvements without exposing the full supply chain. It was the same playbook, rewritten for a new audience. But this time the audience was different. Consumers had become investigators. They cross-checked barcodes, searched import records, and compared supplier lists. Online communities formed to share data, identifying which brands sourced from which regions. Activists used satellite tracking to monitor fishing vessels, proving that some companies still used banned drift nets despite claiming otherwise. The balance of power had shifted. For the first time, information flowed upward, from the people to the corporations. The turning point came when a coalition of environmental and consumer advocacy groups launched a platform called See Truth. The website allowed anyone to scan a can's batch code and see whether it matched known suppliers with questionable histories. Within weeks, millions of users joined. It was the equivalent of shining a flashlight into a dark room. Suddenly, the secrets of the industry were visible to everyone. Brands reacted differently. Brand E attempted to cooperate, integrating C-Truth data into its own website. Brand E resisted, calling the platform unreliable and misleading. Brand C tried to sue the founders of C-Truth for defamation, but the case collapsed when journalists proved that the data came directly from government import logs. Every attempt to silence the movement only fueled it further. Amid this turmoil, the government finally acted. Congress introduced new legislation requiring full traceability for all imported seafood products. For the first time, every can of tuna sold in the United States would need to list its catch area, fishing method, and processing country. It was a seismic shift, years in the making, driven not by corporate goodwill, but by public outrage. The industry's comfortable invisibility was gone. Yet not everyone celebrated. Smaller brands worried about compliance costs, fearing that complex reporting systems might favor big corporations with larger budgets. OceanPure argued for open-source traceability standards to level the playing field, while Bluecurrent pushed for simplified digital tags that even small producers could implement. Despite challenges, both companies remained symbols of what the future could look like: clean, transparent, and accountable. For the old giants, the reckoning was painful. Brand D lost nearly half its market share within months. Brand B attempted a full rebrand, changing its packaging and slogan, but customers recognized the familiar shape of the can. Brand E diversified into frozen meals to offset declining sales. The Tuna Trade Council, once untouchable, found itself under investigation for potential misinformation. Several executives quietly retired. Still, not all was lost. Some companies genuinely began to reform. They invited independent inspectors, published audit results, and replaced vague sustainability promises with measurable goals. Competition shifted from who could advertise best to who could prove the most. It was slow, imperfect progress, but it was real. Looking back, the fall of the canned tuna illusion revealed a larger truth about modern food systems. Every industry built on opacity eventually faces exposure. Technology, activism, and social media have made secrecy harder to maintain. People now expect to see the full story behind what they eat, wear, and use. The same pattern that brought down outdated tuna brands is beginning to affect everything from coffee to cosmetics. For consumers, the lesson is simple but powerful. Trust is not something we are given. It is something we verify. Every purchase we make is a vote for the kind of world we want. Buying from companies that value honesty forces others to change or disappear. It may seem small, but that collective pressure reshapes industries. As this investigation comes to an end, one question remains: will the lessons of the tuna scandal last, or will convenience once again dull our attention? History suggests that comfort often wins, but awareness has a way of spreading, especially when people share what they learn. If even a fraction of consumers keep asking questions, the system will never fully return to darkness. So the next time you reach for a can of tuna, pause for a moment. Ask yourself where it came from, who caught it, who packed it, and what you are really supporting. It is not just a meal, it is a reflection of the world's balance between profit and integrity. And if you followed this story from start to finish, you now understand why that tiny can represent something much bigger than lunch. It is a symbol of accountability, hidden in plain sight. Thank you for watching and staying with us through this investigation. If you believe more people should know the truth behind everyday products, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. Together, awareness becomes action and action becomes change.